Yeah, so today's agenda, or what I basically would like to talk to you about is, after some introductory slides and introducing myself, is basically the lessons that we have learned in the past 5 or 6 years in improving the performance of one of the biggest e-commerce sites in the Netherlands, or actually a couple of biggest e-commerce sites in the Netherlands. What we basically learned, so the lessons that we learned, also from a more, let's say, organizational perspective. So since it's already the end of the day, I decided to not go technically too deep, keep it also a bit high level here and there. And then we'll finish with the Q&A. So first of all, let me introduce myself. So my name is Bart Kooijman. I've been working in IT now for well as over 25 years as a developer. And the last 20 years I've spent at a company called Capgemini. I call myself a full cycle developer, meaning that I do basically everything that's needed to, create an application, build the front end, the back end, and also do everything that's needed to, make it run in the cloud. Thanks to cloud technology, that's of course nowadays a lot easier than back in the days when I started, when it took you 5 months to sometimes get a server. So Java, Kotlin, JavaScript, HTML and CSS are my core skills. And nowadays also complemented, mainly with AWS, because the sites that I will be talking about are running on AWS. Then the question is always, in what area do you use those technologies? Well, I'm mainly busy creating digital marketing and digital commerce solutions. And as you can see here in the image, I'm also in the possession of a Glider pilot license. And that has the advantage that there's always one key takeaway for my presentations, which is that I would like to invite you to, basically come and see the Netherlands from above if you want to in a glider. You can go to this website in the lower right corner, zcflevo.nl, and there we have the option to take you along with us as a passenger, and by doing so you support our club in basically continuing, because we're a club of volunteers. So, and of course you can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter with this hashtag or with this tag. I already told in my introduction that this is the performance journey of a company called Intergamma, in fact. It's the company behind the Gamma and Karwei DIY formulas, so do it yourself. We have over 400 stores across the Netherlands and Belgium. We're one of the biggest retailers in the Netherlands. Different ways to measure that, but from a revenue point of view, we're certainly belonging to the top 5, and I think we're nowadays calling ourselves at least the biggest omni-channel retailer. We have 3 websites that we operate: Gamma Belgium, Gamma.be, Gamma.karwei.nl, and the biggest one that you probably have visited as well, if you're a homeowner, is Gamma.nl. We have about 5 million visitors visiting our sites every month, unique. And we're a top 20 player in the Twinkle Top 100, which is a famous list for e-commerce sites in the Netherlands, including also an honorable mention for our performance during Black Friday. So, as I said, I'm going to be sharing with you, the lessons that we learned over time, finding, performance, improving the performance of our site. And probably the most important lesson that we learned while doing so is that performance is actually a balance between the performance on the one hand and users being able to complete their goals. For us, that means basically that we are trying to find a sort of optimum between the performance of the site on the one hand and the conversion of the site on the other. And what we basically learned, and let me first explain quickly what we mean by conversion. By conversion, we mean, depending on the page that you are at, the action that we would like you to do. So, for example, if you end up on a product detail page, as we call it, we would like you, of course, to add press the Add to Cart button. And basically what we're striving for is to have, for us the best performance is basically to have that optimal conversion. And what we learned is that the fun part with conversion versus performance is that it's a curve with a sort of optimal point in there that you're trying to achieve. So this morning I went to a talk, which was very great, by the way, also about performance. And the question was like, what's the ideal metric to measure your performance on? And everybody started mentioning, time to interactive, contentful paint, those type of metrics. And I was thinking, well, for us, it's actually conversion. If we have, let's say, after each time that we further improve our performance, if the conversion is not increasing anymore, then we have the best performance. And this is a balance that differs per page and also per device. So customers tend to be a bit, easy on you when, for example, your page is expected to take longer. If you're, for example, having a page with a very big report on it, then it doesn't have to be that fast. There's some, and also if a customer is on 3G or on 2G small networks, they also know, or an old device, they know themselves that their device is not that fast. So you get some slack from the customer as well. And these are all factors that you need to take along with you in finding that optimal. Lesson number 2, performance is a marathon, not a sprint, meaning that you need to make sure that you also have the right organization in place. Finding this optimum that I just talked about is quite a big challenge, and you won't find it from the get-go. So what you really need to think of with managing the performance of your application is to get the right organization in place. From my experience, also from my Capgemini experience so far, performance is really also an organizational cultural challenge. Not so much even a technical. Things like, a kind of performance culture in instantiating that, and for example, having the rule that if you touch a page, if you start changing the code of a certain page, you're also responsible for the performance impact. Let's say that kind of mindset, or as an example, that kind of culture is definitely also something you should be aware of and work on. And finally, also, find a champion higher up that will actually also acknowledge the importance of performance and help you out with time, budget, and resources, and anything you need to actually manage it. And then it's basically a matter of, kind of iterating towards your optimum. And basically, it never ends.
What do you mean with a champion higher up?
So, for example, a kind of senior manager. Yeah. So in our case, we were lucky to have an e-commerce director that understood, let's say, the relationship between conversion and performance. So, yeah, we were able to, set up tooling and that kind of stuff. Got some investment for it as well. So, and actually now continuous. Lesson number 3: performance is an experience. Is also something that we learned quite quickly in the process. Back in the days when I started working on performance improvement, we usually looked at the more technical kind of metrics, like time to first byte, DOM loaded, what have you. There are plenty of, let's say, more technical ones. But those numbers usually don't say a lot about how the performance of a page is really perceived by your user. Instead, the user is having much more of what we call a performance experience, where the customer first looks at, is there really something happening? And then moves on to, what is happening? Is that really useful for me? And then finally, once you get the idea that it's indeed a useful page, we check like, okay, is it then really usable? And then all of a sudden, when you start looking from that angle, you need different kind of metrics. For example, the first paint that will help you, keep your customer on your page, because then the customer starts to get the feeling like, okay, something is really happening. But then, of course, you also need to make sure that the first thing that you show starts to then address the question like, okay, is it really useful? Unfortunately, nowadays, browsers have interesting APIs that you can leverage to properly measure these metrics. Of course, the most famous metrics are the core web vitals that I definitely recommend everybody, of course, to measure, which is the largest contentful paint, the first input delay, and also the cumulative layout shift. And the cumulative layout shift also for us turned out to be quite an impactful one for your conversion, where all of a sudden, you know, sometimes you see that happening when, for example, this header or this banner in the top, the save the date one loads in too late, and all of a sudden the entire page shifts downwards. It's that kind of metrics that you really need to, you know, pay attention to. Then the question, of course, arises like, okay, then how do we measure those metrics? And also, how does that impact developers? So as I already said, you know, if you write code, you should be using, or you should take ownership of the performance of that page as well. And what we basically have done is to enhance our development process, first of all, with what we call synthetic testing, which basically means that ideally with each and every build that we make, we have a tool that we use called Speed Curve, which does a bunch of synthetic tests, ideally on every deployment. At the moment, you know, there's still some work to be done to really do it on every deployment, but we at least run it every night to, you know, gain some feedback on yeah, these metrics that I just mentioned. But that's not all to it. Once you go to production, the thing with synthetic testing, it's kind of like a lab setting. So you can basically simulate, you know, the circumstances in which your customer is visiting your page. So you could simulate 3G, you could simulate 4G, you could simulate the device, but it's all simulation. You never know for sure what the performance eventually will be, let alone the impact on your conversion. So what we have done also is, of course, implemented what we call RUM, so real user monitoring, where we make sure that we actually monitor all of our customers and all of the performance metrics within their browser and gather them all together to have a full picture of what the metrics do in real time. Hence the R in RUM being real. Lesson number 5 that we also learned was that the golden rule, of course, of site performance is that you know, the majority of the impact on your performance is made in the front end. We've been able to optimize our backend quite well so far. So we're really focused on, well, a number of things that we see, for example, in lesson number 6, which is a CDN, the use of a CDN. Now, before I go into that, explaining that, I also need to explain a little bit about the architecture that we have. So if you're visiting gamma.nl with your browser, basically what happens is that you go through the CDN to AWS, using also the CDN from AWS being CloudFront. You will then hit the load balancer, and then from there on, you'll end up on our so-called on an ECS cluster, so which is basically a cluster where we run all our services in Docker containers. That's how it works. Then the site itself is separated into 3 parts: the www part, the Kassa part, and the Mijn part. And the Kassa and Mijn part are basically completely client-side rendered React applications, which is basically our checkout and our My Account section. And the WW section is what we call the product discovery side of things, where we actually host our assortment and also a bunch of content pages such as DIY advice pages or inspirational pages where customers can see what our products look like. And also, yeah, especially for Kawaii, in a more design-like inspiration content. It's especially the WW actually all sections are being fronted by CDN. And what was interesting, what we learned, is that everybody, when talking about CDNs, everybody said like, well, that's about caching, you know, making sure that your pages are performing better due to caching. But what we saw when implementing CloudFront in front of our site, that we already got some performance improvements even without leveraging the caching. Because basically what happens is that these CDNs, they are built on quite sophisticated and very fast networks. In the case of CloudFront, the AWS Global Infra Backbone, which is a very fast network, and which basically, which kind of sounds counterintuitive because you're adding extra hops to your network, you know, between your customer or between the user and your origin, your application basically. But these hops are, you know, very much optimized and only used by those customers of AWS. So these are not like complete internet networks with all the benefits, the pros and cons of the web. So that turned out to be quite interesting to see. So our response times, just by fronting with the CDN with CloudFront and not implementing any caching, already dropped with 100 milliseconds, so time to first byte, which of course usually has a positive impact on your start render. So, you know, customers in that phase that ask themselves, like, is there really something happening when loading the page? You know, got an answer more quickly. Also, what you see is that with CDN, you can the CDN, the edge locations of the CDN, basically pool the connections with the origin. So that means that the SSL handshake occurs much less, and that also saved us another 100 milliseconds. And also SSL termination happens closer to the client, which also saves you quite some time. So yeah, CDNs are turned out to be very valuable for us, especially of course when we eventually started caching. And also realized that CDNs nowadays have quite some capabilities to do also rendering on the edge locations as well. We're not yet using that, but clearly thinking of it. And also with regard to security, AWS has quite some advanced features, for example, to do DDoS mitigation. And you know, we're regularly under attack for some reason, I don't know why. But, so yeah, that really helps as well. Lesson number 7. For an e-commerce site, having third-party scripts is really something you barely can't avoid. You know, you need to have, for sure, analytics scripts that are used to gather the click data and get insights into how customers are using the site. But also, of course, retargeting scripts, scripts that are, you know, JavaScripts that are focused on, you know, tracking what the customer is doing, and then, for example, advertising that, or sending them advertising banners on other sites from our sites because we know they have visited us. That's all great, but of course, yeah, they send a lot of JavaScript to our pages and thereby hamper performance. So what we first of all did is we went through the scripts and first had to gain an understanding of, you know, which scripts we were actually loading. And with that, request maps can be of great benefit, which is actually the diagram that you see here on the right. Now, this one I took actually yesterday or today, and already the number of requests that we're making to basically third-party URLs, third-party domains, has already been quite drastically reduced. So we're starting to get in good shape there. But for example, yeah, we had tools to also do screen recordings and heat maps. Yeah, that we have all taken out, and they were impacting quite significantly. And also with these request maps, you can actually see, you know, which tags are actually running there. Also, what we did is, of course, challenging their value. We engaged with business asking them, do you really need this? And by the way, using lab testing again, for example, SpeedCurve, but also webpagetest.org, we showed them what the performance impact really would be, because it's quite easy to set up a test with webpagetest or SpeedCurve where you're not calling the domain anymore, you just exclude the domain, and then you can easily compare, at least in lab form, the differences, the performance penalty that you're also paying. Also be keen on double functionality, so don't use multiple tag managers, that also helps, or multiple scripts from different vendors that do the same thing. And of course be careful with what we call the tag manager, which is basically a tool where some of our marketeers can easily plug in new pieces of JavaScript. But once you do have them, those third-party scripts, because as I already mentioned, they're kind of hard to avoid, then of course the first and foremost thing that you need to be aware of is that they are not render blocking, because that's going to heavily impact your performance. Meaning that we ideally in this diagram try to avoid the top situation, where if a script gets loaded, it basically stops the HTML from rendering. Ideally, we use the defer option, because defer basically makes sure that the script execution starts well after the page is being loaded. Unfortunately, that isn't always possible, especially with click tracking. There you need to be careful, because sometimes you already want to start gathering click events or usage events even before the rendering of the page is fully complete. So there you need to strike a balance. And then sometimes async can work, depending on where you locate, of course, the script tag in your HTML. Another thing that we also do is, of course, if possible, move things to the server. This is especially the case with A/B testing tools. A/B testing tools can have quite a significant impact on your performance, and even sometimes cause flickering. So what we have done is we have moved our A/B test approach completely server-side. And then of course already the, let's say, rendered HTML gets sent to you. Another strategy that we use to solve the problem of the performance penalty caused by third-party scripts is sampling them. This is something that we do nowadays with our heat map tooling. Heat map tooling is basically kind of recording where people are looking at, or what they are at least focused on and what they are clicking on. And by sampling that, we only load these scripts, well, not for all our 5 million customers, but just for a smaller number, just to make sure that we don't, make the page slower for all of them. Another strategy that we have is basically self-hosting them. The nice thing about self-hosting your scripts is that it saves you a lot of additional connection overhead. If you're loading third-party scripts really from another domain, then you might run into the problem that, for example, the SSL handshake that we need to make, which is quite expensive and lengthy, occurs multiple times for each and every domain you're contacting. So by hosting them all on the same domain that you're already in contact with, it helps you save some time and thereby improve performance. And last but not least, but that's basically not something you can also use for your normal JavaScript, is of course resource hints. And with resource hints, we basically tell the browser to, for example, already pre-connect to the domain where the third-party script is coming from, which is with the pre-connect attribute that you can use. Another option is to just do DNS fetching, so that at least already the IP address is known, but yeah, for us, pre-connecting usually works best here. Lesson number 9. For us, of course, images are very important. Images, again, help conversion a lot. In most cases, for example, on our product detail page where we show a carousel of images, we have multiple images. So, yeah, it's really important to basically find the right balance between size and quality. And for us, after doing a lot of investigation into the different formats, it turned out to be that WebP is actually very helpful. And so far has been given us the best balance. Back in the days when we started looking in this format, it wasn't very well supported by browsers, but nowadays that's pretty much solved. Thanks also to our content management system that we use, we can actually fetch even images that have been stored into JPEG formats, for example. We can even fetch them in WebP as well. So the digital asset management system of the content management system that we use is able to change the format on the fly when calling for it. And also image CDNs can support this feature as well. So that's very helpful in getting the right, getting it in the right format. And also, depending on the client, we nowadays also start to play around with the quality of the image. So we can even, on request, change the quality and also the resolution, even if we want to, which is also, again, helpful for responsive design situations. So if you need to be responsive. You do have to be careful with WebP, which is in the case of animations. So if you want to make animated images, then stick with GIF. The famous animated GIFs are still a little bit better because they leverage the CPU a little bit less. If CPU is important to you, then keep that in mind. And finally, of course, these image formats continuously evolve, and at the moment, AVIF looks very promising, and this kind of illustrates that performance is basically a never-ending story, let's say, where even formats of images continuously change, and you need to be aware of that and figure out what it can do for you. One thing that I would like to also briefly touch upon is I mentioned that we are using SpeedCurve, and I would like to quickly show you to get a bit of a sense of what we mean by what SpeedCurve is. I would like to show it to you as well. We have chosen SpeedCurve. There are plenty of other tools that can do this as well. Calibre is, of course, also a quite famous one. We have chosen this one because behind the scenes, the tools that it uses are based on webpagetest.org. And we were already working a lot with that one even before we started using this. And as I mentioned, it basically uses all those new metrics nowadays that we have out of the box. And for example, things like now largest content full paint is in here and is being measured. In this case, you're looking at a measurement of our homepage, where of course, the largest content paint is formed by one of the key banners that is on top. And we're looking closely at how these images also build up and how these metrics perform. What we can even do with SpeedCurve, which is quite interesting, is also in the HTML define certain places that are important for a particular use case. So, for example, for a product detail page, which I, by the way, can show, it's of course important that the product images show quickly. So you could then designate those images in the HTML as something that SpeedCurve needs to measure individually. So basically creating custom metrics that are important to your use case. So you can see those over here. Now, in this case, the largest contentful pane turned out to be the product image as well. So here we don't necessarily have to do anything custom, but the thing is that you can, of course. So yeah, that's basically what SpeedCurve does. What SpeedCurve doesn't do is measuring the kind of metrics, for example, time to interactive, that you can only measure in the field, so in real time. So in order to complement that, we're using Datadog. And Datadog, for example, here measures the first input delay, which is a metric that's kind of hard to measure synthetically, because that depends on when users are actually starting to engage with your page. And that's why it's better to measure this in real time. So here you can actually see this one is from our checkout. So customers that go through our checkout flow, we're looking into here to what extent they're basically suffering, what these metrics are doing there. And of course, we also get warnings. That's also the nice thing about real user monitoring, that of course, when these metrics drop below a certain level, we get notified immediately. You can actually also further drill down into it if you want to, and also, and that's actually quite nice, also drill down further into the backend in case that might be the cause of any trouble as well. So that's the nice thing about Datadog. In Datadog, it goes also to some extent beyond the performance as well, and for example also provides you security monitoring and log analysis. Is there anything else? Oh, by the way, SpeedCurve also helps you with the with measuring the third-party scripts again. How many do you have? And one thing I'm particularly interested in is that for some reason, as of August of this year, the amount of JavaScript that we're sending has significantly increased. So that's something that we need to dig into. You can set what they call performance budgets. That's very important also for you to do. Once you have an idea of what your optimal is, your performance conversion ratio, it's time to start basically setting performance budgets. So how many kilobytes of JavaScript are you actually sending, and are we exceeding that budget and thereby maybe impacting our conversion or not? That's something that SpeedCurve can help you with as well. And of course, the vitals, I already mentioned them briefly. They are also individually reported on, including also things like total blocking time, etc. You can find in here. Okay, that all being said, I think there's now plenty of time to have some questions if you want to, which is over here. Yep.
I saw you used an image placeholder before on a product detail page. Does
Yep.
it matter what kind of placeholder you use?
That's a good question. I need to briefly look at Julio, maybe. Do you know? Doesn't matter. Okay.
Okay, but there's no preference for users for the type?
At least a low kilobyte portion.
Okay.
Yep. Cool.
Do you have solutions for when you're offline? You're not using caching, you say?
Well, nowadays we do use caching on the CDN, so we are caching pages there, and to some extent we're also caching some pages in the browser, but not yet to completely support offline scenarios. So we're not on that level yet.
Not yet.
No.
How do you solve that, do you think?
Yeah, then there are different use cases when it comes to going offline. First of all, you need to be able to detect it. That's the first step that we need to take. So looking at APIs that tell you to what extent, what kind of connectivity you have, whether it's completely offline, yes or no. And then there are service workers that can help you out with that, and of course caching in the browser itself. So yeah, we haven't looked into that much detail yet, but that's the direction that we're thinking of.
Then you're thinking about progressing web apps?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. Yeah.
But is this not still not yet progressing?
No, we're not yet the PWA. We have a slightly different kind of mobile strategy nowadays, so yeah, it's different. Yeah.
Is there also a role for energy usage and costs?
That's a good question. That's at the moment, no. So we're not looking into that. So indeed, the energy consumption on either the devices of our customers versus also on our own servers, we're not factoring that in yet. But it is something that we're aware of, that we need to start looking into it. And that will actually be something that we can coincide or manage together with performance as well. Good question. Yeah.
If on many sites, for example, news websites, they have like 20 scripts for tracking and ads.
Yeah.
And if you work then, yeah, you can improve your own code. But if there is so much other stuff going down, it doesn't help anymore. And if you talk to the manager, they say, well, they make the money, so good luck changing anything there. So
yeah.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, so yeah, we had that, for example, with loading our feedback tool. That turned out to be quite impactful on our performance. Also due to, for example, the cumulative layout shift, because the button you have to click on if you have feedback loaded in quite late, so and it kind of overlaid in some cases. Then you have a problem indeed, because then you basically need to go to the vendor and start engaging with them to tell and show them and prove to them that your performance is not okay, and that they have to solve it. And that's of course one of the big drawbacks of third-party scripts, that you're kind of out of control. And especially if those scripts load in the head and they have to be for some reason render blocking, then of course you also run the risk of if they go offline, that your whole page won't load anymore. This has happened in the past, for example, with users of Adobe Analytics. Adobe Analytics had an outage, and then basically it renders sites completely blank. So that's something that we are talking about a lot with our vendors, and then it helps that you're one of the biggest retailers in the Benelux, because then you can they listen a little bit more quickly to you. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm done, unless there are any further questions. Okay.